like packing rice from one thing into another. Oh, hello.
Hi, welcome to an edition.
We're just catching up.
Welcome to this, the final season
Yes, for
closing
2018, right.
program of Cambridge Inside Out.
Right.
I'm Robert Winters.
Judy Nathans.
And,
Yeah, because it was also the last city council meeting last night
City
for
Council
the
meeting
2018.
for the year. It's not the last one forever. They'll be back.
Of 2018.
Right, of 2018.
But not back till the 7th.
That's right, yeah. And we'll be off next week and the following week because of the holidays.
Right,
So
right.
Happy holidays to everybody.
Right. So
we had a little fun last night at City Hall.
fun, is that what you're calling it?
You know, I don't know about fun really, but
I
it's,
watched it.
You know, sometimes it's interesting. Sometimes there's the dynamics of not only the city councilors but also the input from the public and people who are not there in the public, but they're speaking sort of from beyond.
Yes.
Kind of influence. And so the big item last night, there was a lot of other little bits and pieces.
Yeah.
But the item that was kind of at the center of attention. Actually, there were two. There was the cannabis zoning.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
And then there was this late order from the previous week that Denise Simmons said.
Charter right, yeah.
And then she exercised her charter right because she knew there was going to be some controversy or discussion about it. And it was kind of interesting how the controversy evolved. But basically the idea was there was a proposal from Governor Baker that was filed last December.
Did it come from him or did it come from the House and then endorsed? That was confusing to me.
It came from Governor Baker. It was House Bill 4075, I believe.
Right.
And it was sold
a year ago, though. I mean, that's according to Denise. Yeah.
And it was an act for it was a housing choice initiative
called a housing choice bill.
Right. And in its initial incarnation,
which is the 7.5 version.
Right.
Yeah.
So for that version, which I think actually, and here it is actually.
Right. And Robert also has both versions on his website.
Yeah, actually I want to say something about that too.
Okay.
So initially what it was very specific about doing something to produce more housing starts, housing growth.
In areas that have not.
In areas that typically don't go along with it.
Right.
Right. So.
Which means multi or apartments or whatever.
Yeah. So arguably, places like Cambridge and Somerville and Boston in recent years have been
trying to do their part.
Yeah, stepping up to kind of meet the projected demand, the current demand and projected demand for how much housing is necessary for all the people who've been coming to the area to seek the jobs that we've been producing.
The word affordable isn't necessarily in there.
No, it was right, and that was kind of part of the controversy.
Sure.
So that was what it was, and it was the mechanism. And by the way, there have been attempts for a decade or more to try and address this problem of the suburban communities sort of zoning out.
Right. You're talking about on the state and the legislature.
Yeah. So the legislature sort of tried a few things over the years. It was actually several decades ago is when they passed what they called Chapter 40B, which was the snob zoning, anti-snob zoning. Which basically
that has been effective, yes? No.
It's a two-edged sword. So what
is 40B?
So 40B in a nutshell, and again, I'm not the world's greatest expert in this, but 40B in a nutshell was a way of getting suburban towns, not suburban towns, because you can do it in Cambridge too, but it was for especially targeting towns that had below a certain threshold, 10% of what what could be called affordable housing units. I think that refers to subsidized housing units, not necessarily including things that are what you might call naturally occurring affordable places, because there are a lot of places where with no regulations at all, there's affordable rent.
Affordable rent, right.
In fact, a lot of places, including Cambridge, used to once upon a time had affordable rents without regulation. Okay, so you got to understand what the terminology means.
Okay.
So what they did is they said if you're a housing developer of low-income housing, and again, it's not, you don't have to be exclusive. I think it's something like if you're going to...
a percentage of your housing.
If you want to do a housing project that's, I think, at least 25%, quote, affordable, unquote, then you could kind of get a streamlined process. You could bypass certain zoning rules and then build your project. Okay, and that's actually produced some housing.
And it wouldn't depend on the local municipal body vetoing it?
Right. I think
Bypass
you can,
that process?
I don't think you bypass everything, but the thing
see.
is you certainly bypass some things.
Okay,
So you still have to go in front of a local, either planning board or
Okay.
Or some
Zoning,
other
yeah.
responsible board
okay.
in order to get your comprehensive permit. But the thing is that you don't have to
To
sort
get your
of
bill, yeah, okay.
go through everything. Now,
Okay.
there are actually provisions in there, so you can, even in a community like Cambridge, which has in excess of the threshold of
Many
so-called
apartment
affordable housing
yeah.
units, you can still seek a comprehensive permit, and you can streamline the process to some degree, right? Whether this has been effective or not, hard to say. One thing I think is factually correct is that oftentimes a developer who wants to just build a housing project, not necessarily with an affordability component, goes to a town, says, I want to build this project, and then the town says, well, we don't want you to build that project. And they go, oh, really? Okay, in that case, I'm going to do a 40B project.
I see, so they
And then
first
they
ask
relent.
nicely, and then they say, well, we're
Right,
gonna
so
use this
it has
leverage.
often been used as a bit of a
Yeah.
bludgeon in order to almost negotiate a project that you want to do. Now, so housing gets produced, so I guess you could argue that that's a good thing, but I don't know that that's exactly how 40B was intended to work.
Right, but I think the idea was that a town should allow more apartment buildings,
Yeah.
regardless of who lives there, and I guess they didn't like them because
Right.
it would mean
So-
more kids in the schools,
So
more
what's,
what, yeah.
when zoning enabling legislation first appeared in Massachusetts, which goes back to, I believe, the 1920s, I think initially zoning was, fair to say, was there, as they often say, to keep the smokestacks away from the nursery schools, to separate out uses. So, they have categories for residential
Business versus
use,
commercial, okay.
commercial,
Okay.
industrial, open space, whatever. So I think, there's just
That makes
a
sense.
few categories. And then over time, they fine-tuned it a bit, for better
Yeah.
or worse, to allow high-density residential, low-density residentials, single-family only type zoning,
What's the most restrictive zoning in Cambridge? What's the letter? A?
resident A.
Okay.
So it's lowest density. I think it might be
Single
0.35 FAR. I'm not 100% sure. It could be 0.5.
Okay.
And it's single-family zoning. Now, there's not that much of that really in Cambridge, and I think it's sort of exists because of it's sort of an acknowledgement of the fact that historically there were some of these established neighborhoods with these, the sort of the
West Cambridge.
the West Cambridge sort of architecturally significant,
Rattle
kind of
Street. The
estates.
historic districts, really.
Yeah. Now there's some people who would love to obliterate it all because, those are those rich people and you got to go after the rich people. But, then there are other people who says,
They pay
Cambridge,
taxes too.
yeah,
A lot of them.
Cambridge works as pretty well as a kind of a diverse housing stock. So there's a mix of low density, middle density, single family, two family, three family, big apartment buildings, whatever.
Condo, rental.
I mean, I tend to fall in the camp that I think it's okay to have a mix. Should you necessarily have areas that don't allow anything but single family housing? I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that.
Yeah.
But the problem is not Cambridge. The problem is that if you go out to, the Belmonts and the Westons of this world, they'll zone, and apparently they have the right to do it. They'll zone and pretty much say nothing, no multifamily housing at all. And in terms of lot size for every dwelling unit.
More Weston than Belmont. Belmont is.
Right. That's
okay.
more like
Yeah.
two families and whatever. But it's
Yeah.
there's not a lot of high density
No,
stuff in
no
Belmont.
condo.
But if you go out to Weston, it's sort of more like, I think they kind of want to keep their country like setting.
Weston is single families. I mean, I don't.
Typically, yeah, exactly. All right. Now the thing is that maybe that's okay if you're away from where the jobs are, away from where transit exists. Maybe having high density in a place where the only way you can get in and out of it is by automobile. Maybe you don't want too much density in a place like that, perhaps. But there are some communities that actually have T access, which have relatively low
And
densities.
commuter rail access.
Or commuter rail access,
Which,
you know.
that's a whole other story about
Yeah.
improving it, but yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
there's been efforts over the years to try and address this, to sort of get the. I mean, I think some years ago, the MAPC, Metropolitan Area Planning Council, came out with this 2030 vision of what the housing production would have to be to meet
The needs of
the fact that the people were coming here for the jobs. And you know, there's some places like Cambridge and Somerville to some degree, and Boston, which has been basically stepping up to the plate to try
Boston,
and
they
meet
said
or
some
exceed.
50,000 units by a certain time. They
Exactly.
pledged that.
But
yeah.
meanwhile, when you get just outside of like these like three communities, maybe a little more than three, it drops off real fast.
Yeah.
And so how do you address that, right? So there was this bill from the Governor Baker, which says pretty much what we're going to do is, right now, currently, Massachusetts is I think maybe, 10 or 20 states that require a 2/3 vote in order to enact
I
zoning
thought they said only
laws.
10 states.
Maybe as
Yeah.
low as 10,
Yeah.
right? You know, and so they're identifying that 2/3 threshold as sort of being the stumbling block. I'm not convinced of that, only because I think the real problem in a place like Weston is that it's not a matter of whether they could reach a 2/3
Right.
vote in order to allow higher
If
density
they're all
housing.
of the same mindset,
I
then
think-
what
I think
difference
they-
does it make?
If they're not going to
Yeah.
get 2/3, they're probably not going to
Yeah.
get a majority either.
Right.
Now, maybe there's a few places like Newton or Brookline or something that
Brookline
might
has town
actually.
meetings. I don't know how that would work. It's a lot more people.
It's 2/3
Yeah.
of town meeting then.
Well,
you
that's a
know?
lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing is that the idea was that we're going to drop the threshold to a 50% simple majority to enact zoning legislation that is specific to several housing-related matters. This includes things like allowing some higher density, doing some what they call cluster housing. So you know, you have open space, but you cluster some higher density things around there. You allow things like accessory dwelling units. Multifamily housing would be then permitted too. And the thing is that if you would simply pass a 50% threshold to permit it, then it would be allowed. You don't have to meet the higher threshold of 2/3.
Yeah, but you're right. It's like assuming the makeup of that whoever body is going to be, that's going to make the difference. And I
Right.
agree with you that you can't count on that.
I don't
Although I
think
guess people could be elected, you know, versus like
Yeah.
how do they feel about zoning? I
Right.
don't know. I mean,
So what my remark, I don't know, we speak at city council meetings.
I
but
heard you.
I made my
Yeah.
point, which is basically that I actually agree with the goals. You know, I think that requiring multifamily housing, at least it doesn't have to be citywide in any given city and town, but they have to permit areas. You can't citywide ban multifamily homes. That's just ridiculous. Right, and also just saying that you're going to have a citywide density threshold that's going to say for every dwelling unit you need to have a 1/4 acre, right? You know, maybe if you go way out in the country, that's all right. But the thing is, as you get closer to town or any place, certainly within T access, it's kind of ridiculous, right? So, for example, if you go into even in a town like Weston, there is actually a commuter rail that goes to Weston. So, shouldn't there be permitted high density things at least close to commuter rail stops? Okay. So anyway, so Governor Baker and the people who helped draft this, they said, well, you know, the problem, we are identifying currently the problem to be this 2/3 threshold. You know, and then they had these wonderful goals, but I'm not convinced that the 2/3 threshold is
Is the problem.
the real problem.
Yeah.
I think the problem is that there are cities and towns which they won't even achieve a simple majority to allow some of these totally reasonable things. So I guess my argument would be maybe a little more draconian in a way, depending
Yeah.
on your perspective,
Yeah.
which is to simply remove the capacity of a city and town to
even
zone.
regulate that?
Well, I mean, it's state enabling legislation. The
So it'd
state,
be like 40B then.
right. So,
in a
but
way,
well, except that 40B is very specific to the production of a
No,
particular
but
type
the
of housing.
idea that you can do this without getting the approval of a body.
Right. So the thing is,
Yeah.
is that right now, you know, if a town says we only allow single-family homes in our town, you say, sorry, you can't do that. That's the change I would make, is that you
That
can't
is pretty draconian.
zone it out of existence. So in other words, you don't
That
have
sounds
to.
very socialist, Robert.
Well, I think it's just more realist
For you.
because it
Yeah, I
doesn't
know,
say
yeah.
you can't have single-family portions of your town.
But you
the
have
thing is,
to-
you have to allow some
you
part of
have
your
to
town to
be-
allow multifamily,
Right.
maybe even apartment
You have
buildings.
to be part of the world. In a way. You have to be a little
That's right.
kinder and,
Right, because
and
if you
generous
don't,
with
what
your-
happens then is you
Yeah.
transfer all of the burden
Yeah.
of providing all of the housing to places like Cambridge, Somerville, and Boston.
Yeah,
And that's not fair,
yeah.
right? So that's kind of my
Especially when you're
perspective.
driving into using our highways to get to your high-tech jobs.
Right, exactly, right? So that's how I would
Share
change
the
it.
burden is what
And
you're
I-
saying.
I
but
think in a
you
way
think that would ever?
I don't know, but
Someone must have proposed that over the years.
Right, and maybe it was defeated
Yeah.
repeatedly, and that's the reason why they're trying
Right,
this. Okay?
right,
All
yeah.
right. So I don't
Okay.
know that it's the end of the world if this thing passes. By the way, I think.
Do you think
know,
it will, though? I mean, all right, so now it's in an
All right. Well,
informal
here's
session.
the problem.
They had to
and,
check on what
there
that
are many
meant.
people.
Yeah.
Councilor Simmons in particular says you shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Right,
Right. Okay. So there's this proposal here that has good goals,
right.
but maybe
It's only a piece of the puzzle.
right, just a
Or
just a piece of the puzzle.
problem, yeah.
But the thing is then what happens is the sort of more hard left elements come into the picture, and they say, well, this is just a giveaway to the real
Hmm. Yeah,
estate
it doesn't say anything about
developers.
affordability,
It's not
doesn't
about
say anything about
affordability.
tenant, look, yeah.
But then again, there are many who are of the belief that
Mm-hmm.
the reason why things are unaffordable is because there's simply an inadequate supply of the housing. And if you start by just increasing the supply of the housing, then that's going to take a lot of the pressure off the market, which is going to lead to some level
Right,
of affordability.
and there is that argument. There's people argue the other way, though, that the more luxury
Right.
high-rises that get built, it prices out people looking for other stuff.
Right, but the thing is, that's where I find the rhetoric kind of interesting,
Mm-hmm.
because when you listen to people like public comment, or if you listen to Representative Connolly, make
Mm-hmm.
his spiel about all this, he makes it out as if, oh, this is nothing, anytime housing is built and it's not regulated and controlled and whatever, it's somehow a giveaway to the evil capitalists,
To the
and the
developers,
developers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, the truth of the matter is that almost all housing that was ever built in Cambridge, Somerville,
Mm-hmm.
Boston, elsewhere, was just built and it was unregulated. I live in a house that was not regulated, it was
Yeah.
just built in 1912, So the thing is that most housing in Cambridge, Somerville, Boston, and elsewhere is just got built. And the
Yeah.
thing is, there was a level of affordability that in many places has disappeared, right? So how do you bring back some level of affordability? I think supply is a part of the picture. Now,
But you're against the affordable housing overlay, which is another area, but in a way that okay.
I'm not in favor of the affordable housing overlay that's has been, which
You
is
see,
separate
that
from
is
this
social.
matter.
I know, but that
Yeah.
would be increasing housing in an area that has been seen as just a resident,
Well,
right?
what I don't like about it
Okay.
is specifically the fact that if I'm a homeowner and I have a lot of a certain size,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm allowed only to have my house be up to a certain density and height, but then one of
Mm-hmm. Next
these
door
nonprofit developers
buys
comes
the
in,
house next door and makes
buys
4
an
units.
identical lot, and
Yeah.
then puts in and is
But it's
somehow.
for the public good, Robert.
But the thing is that
I mean,
where
I'm
I
actually-
live
yeah.
is I'm part of the public too.
I know, but
And
you
if
don't
there's-
live in that other house.
But if there is somebody who's in a family and they're living in a single or two-family house, they're part of the public as well,
Right.
right? So the thing is should necessarily the neighboring property be permitted to build to
Okay, but now I'm
quadruple the
going to
density?
use your same argument because you're talking about Weston with their single-family stuff not wanting this. What is the difference here?
Well, the thing is that if you're talking about, there's a big difference between having like a quarter
Okay.
lot, a quarter acre lot size,
Versus
and
what's
versus
in-
building a building right up to your lot line, 10
So you're
feet away
saying
from your house.
they could. I thought they had to use the existing FAR on the building.
No, that's my biggest
Oh, okay,
objection.
okay, I see
My
what
biggest
you're saying
objection
now.
to the affordable
I
housing
see.
overlay
Is that they really
basically
can-
they're going to eliminate all the rules that everybody else
So
is
the
subject
density
to
goes
playing.
out of the question. Okay.
Right. So the thing is, they allow much higher. It's not even a little bit. It's not a density bonus. It's
Hmm.
like many times over. Setbacks just eliminated, and it's all done as of right, so you can't even object. right?
Right, well, that's an important part of it, yeah.
So I don't think it's the right solution.
Yeah,
And I think in many ways it's being done almost as a vendetta against people who are living in not the highest density parts of town. I mean, I live in a C1 density, so mine FAR is like 1.21 in a .075.
C1, I thought you were a BA zone.
But it has to,
Oh.
residentials have to follow the C1 rules.
Okay.
Right, so that's what. So I live in one of the denser parts of town. Much of the eastern
Okay.
part of the city is residence C1 densities for housing. So that's why you see a lot of triple deckers,
Right.
2 and 3 family
Whereas
homes.
West Cambridge is what?
Lower density. It's not
So-
all of West
okay.
Cambridge, but some parts of West Cambridge are lower density. But then again, historically, there would be people who might be born in East Cambridge, in high density, side by side buildings, who said, they saved their money and they wanted to live in a place of a little bit low, with a yard and whatever. So they moved to another part of Cambridge because that's what they wanted. And now they're being treated as though somehow they are some bad person because they're living exclusively, even though in fact they weren't wealthy people when they bought those
Well, some of
places
them
out in
were,
West
right.
B.
But some
Right.
are.
What's happened is the world has changed, and now there's been this recent competition from all quarters that have been driving the prices up.
Yeah.
But I don't think that should invalidate some of the choices that people made when they decided to live in a residence B, like a 2-family district.
Right, but I guess if you just recently bought one of those houses for $4 million or $5 million,
Well, it
you
wouldn't
may
be that
not.
much, right?
What are you talking?
Resident A
I'm talking about Resident A.
mansions. Yeah, right. Okay.
But according to this, you
Right.
could buy another next
Right.
door to it and
But-
do something.
Right. No, I just don't see where that's going to be solving problems. I just think that's sort of being done almost sort of as to sort of thumb your nose at certain
Yeah, it's trying to
individuals.
say do your share, which I think is what
Right.
we're saying to these other. It's complicated.
It is complicated. It is
I
complicated.
mean, I think there's
And-
ways
and-
it could be done where people wouldn't object if you're going to have, if it was like 4 units on an existing FAR.
Right. I mean, the
Okay.
thing is, the issue is not
What's wrong with that?
who's the owner,
Yeah.
who's going to live in it. The issue
Yeah.
is
Well,
why.
no,
is
for
it-
some people it is
But
who's going to live in it.
That's fine, but that's true everywhere. That's true.
Well-
That's true in residency one as well, right? Some people like or don't like who the neighbors are going to be. That's how it's been in every
yeah,
city,
but if they already know
everywhere.
it's going to be,
Right.
I mean, affordable, that word ridiculous, as you have said.
Right.
What's
I have
affordable?
another sort of philosophical
Yeah.
objection, which is that I actually don't like the idea of government or government agencies,
Mm-hmm.
government-supported agencies, taking over bigger and bigger fractions of the housing stock of the city.
Hmm.
I have posed the question on the housing working group of the Envision Cambridge. Well, what do you think is the ideal percentage of government-regulated housing should be as part of the housing stock? And people are always evasive. I've asked.
Yeah,
All right. So right now, Cambridge already.
you could show that here if you
Yeah, we
want.
can actually show a little bit
It's
of this
very
here.
nice, yeah.
Right, so Cambridge actually right now, just in terms of subsidized units, and the
Yeah.
numbers are a little old, but the percentages are still more or less accurate.
Okay.
So Cambridge is just shy of 15% right now.
Right.
And and with the inclusionary zoning, that is on the rise because
Right.
you're requiring 20% of all the new larger buildings to be have these set aside units.
So this number, we're the 11th in the state?
It's the 11th out of 351.
Oh, municipalities,
So,
okay.
so the notion that somehow Cambridge is not doing its part, or it's providing an inadequate supply of affordable
Or that we
housing
need more and more,
units,
which we do. So,
it's just
yeah.
fiction, right?
Why isn't Brookline in here?
Brookline is further down, right?
It went by order of.
Yeah, so I edited out
that's
the most
interesting.
of them, but I did include all the closer ones. So Brookline is at about 9.4%. Interestingly, Somerville is at 7.9%, which is the state average.
That's it.
Or excuse me, 9.7%, which is
Interesting,
the
is
statewide
right.
average.
Yeah.
Okay. So the thing is
Wow.
that you want to make a case that maybe Somerville ought to be stepping up to the plate a bit. I think you can make the
Watertown, I
case.
mean, look at Watertown, that's close to us.
Right. So the thing is that-
Newton has more than Watertown.
right, but they're all like half of what Cambridge is producing.
Yeah.
So the thing is that
Arlington.
So Cambridge is going to
Belmont,
do a
way
little bit
down
more.
there. Look at that.
exactly. So
Whoa.
Cambridge could do a little bit more,
Yeah.
but I don't know that I agree with this notion that somehow
Right.
there should be this, you know, just a
just- but
blanket,
just- okay.
a blanket, you know, so, you know, that somehow, I mean, let me just say that, you know, when I asked A Better Cambridge group about
Oh, yeah.
what do you think the ideal percentage should be? They were always evasive. They never answer the question. They just say more, more, more.
So has anyone answered your question?
No. But the thing is, I did look at the Cambridge Residents Alliance and the platform that they were promoting for
Yeah.
the 2017 election.
And what'd they
said
say?
20% low income, 5% middle income. So they say it should be 25%. Right? Now,
I would go more for the middle income. We need more middle income.
I agree. But the thing is as Patrick Barrett and others have pointed out, middle income housing is market housing. The thing is right now things are a little out of
Right,
out
so
of
it's
whack.
still,
but the
right.
thing is, if you're a middle income earner, you're not looking to apply to a government agency for your housing. You're
Right,
looking for an
you make
affordable
too
place
much
to live.
right.
Right, it's also-
Those are the people I really care about. The
Right,
people that are
so-
making more
so
than
middle income
poverty.
people,
yeah.
they want to build up a little equity in whatever they do. So that's if they're going to buy as opposed to rent, that's what they're looking for. You know, so I don't think the political groups in this city, ABC and Cambridge Residents Alliance, don't seem to care about that at all. You know, which bothers me. By the way, I've been told that the people with the Residents Alliance would want an even higher percentage of regulated housing, like up to a third of all.
Of
right?
all housing?
Yeah.
For low income
Right,
or for
and,
any
and there
income?
are some very negative consequences of having too high a fraction. For example,
Well, tax base.
well, what happens is that when you regulated housing, you know, the taxes are based on an income stream, and it's not a lot of income stream on those, so they pay a lot less taxes than the rest of the housing stock. So the more you regulate, the more you shift the burden onto the existing privately owned housing stock. And then you say, well, then people will rebel. People will revolt. They'll say, well, we're not going to watch our property taxes go through the roof.
Yeah.
So how do you mitigate that? You build more commercial development.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what has happened. Even during the rent control days,
Yeah.
that's what happened. You had dramatic increases
Which
in
is why
commercial development to cover the
Lower the
bills.
yeah.
You know, it's a liberal city. It wants to spend pretty liberally on programs or whatever. How do you cover the costs?
Yeah.
Well, you know, if you take some of the housing out of the equation, you either shift it onto the rest of the residential or you go for broke with commercial. So there are consequences to these
Yeah.
policies. And
Yeah.
what bothers me is how evasive city officials and these political groups are when you even ask them a straight
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So that bothers me a lot. So anyway, there's
Among
more to
other
say
things,
about this.
yes.
So yeah, and
All right.
we'll talk about what they did.
Oh, yeah, right.
When we come back in a
Okay.
few minutes on Cambridge
See you.
Inside Out.